Now know that this woman is Markiona, the Puppeteer of Death. We also know she's a bit of a monster. Go figure with a title like Puppeteer of Death. She's a former workshop technician like Geppetto and Eugenie, who has joined up with the alchemists and has since made quite a name for herself there. Enough to get herself put on propaganda posters at least, and to earn the title of Enlightened One. Her list of accomplishments include discovering the maid puppet Camille, the first puppet found have an awakened ego according to the alchemist, who may or may not have been Carlo's mother in puppet form, and creating the arch puppets. The arch puppets are the gold mask puppets found on the poster and the greenhouse section of Overture you may have seen. She's been using them to spread the carcass monster elixir throughout Krat and apparently the zoo. Krat Zoo was originally opened by Colonel Little, but after his death, it was bought by the alchemists. For a while, it was managed by Filato, the taxidermist, a friend of the Colonel's. He apparently carried on his will, but has since gone missing, and it seems like Markiona has taken over, as she calls the zoo her domain, and seems to have a workshop set up in the greenhouse area. Of course, she and the alchemist have been using Krat Zoo for experimentation, and this has resulted in the horror show of mutated animals that now inhabit the zoo. This hasn't gone entirely unnoticed, as the alchemists have sent out an emergency directive warning of a puppet heading to Krat Zoo that could hinder their plans. Ordinarily, Geppetto's puppet would be the #1 suspect, but seeing as Overtures in the past, Krat Zoo is the first area of the DLC, and so he just got here, it's probably not referring to him. Plus, Markiona says as much in the first trailer.
You're not the puppet I was expecting. Who are you?
That brings up the question, which puppet is she expecting? I've got two theories that seem to be the most likely right now. Gemini or Romeo. Let's look at Gemini first. You might be thinking, Gemini? The alchemists are afraid of a lantern? Well, for quite a while now, it's been theorized that Gemini used to have a more functional body at some point, whether as a human or a more mobile puppet one. This is because the memory on Alchemist Isle Beach, where the legendary stalker asks him to get rid of Carlo and Romeo, as they bother her about training. My theory has been that Gemini had the ability to jump into empty puppet bodies, as he seemed to be able to do in cut content. I've made a video on that theory if you want more on that, but the details aren't too important for this. Could he be the puppet Markiona is expecting? Well, there's a couple things Gemini says in Overture gameplay that makes him a little suspect. Before he comes to terms with the fact that he and Geppetto's puppet have time traveled into the past, he mentions that the zoo burned down. That's not really a clue on its own, but he also says, "I remember a day like this, a day when snow was falling on the zoo." This seems like foreshadowing that he was there on that day. However, we see evidence that the legendary stalker has been here as well, such as this alchemist corpse that appeared in the story trailer. We see it a little bit less stylized here, but there are rose petals on the ground around it. Interacting with it actually makes Gemini say that he recognizes this handiwork, and asks if Geppetto's puppet has heard of the legendary stalker. We also see a destroyed arch puppet and another alchemist corpse in Markiona's workshop, both with rose petals scattered around them too. We do see her carrying the monad lamp at times, so it's possible he was there with her, but in the lamp. In the jungle zone of the zoo, there's this particularly gruesome scene that can be interacted with, and when you do, Gemini says there must have been a fight, but this much blood, someone is dying or dead. You may recognize this broken blade here as the one on Romeo's scythe weapon, the same one that appears in the story trailer. It sure looks like Romeo was at the zoo and fighting, but a broken blade doesn't seem like a good sign for him. We know that Romeo becomes a puppet at some point, and that he allowed it to happen so that he could save more people. We also know that as the king of puppets, he did what he could to direct his puppets to stop the alchemists and the petrification disease. It's also interesting that Krat Zoo burns down, and Romeo is associated with fire in the base game. On the other hand, we don't know if Romeo is a puppet yet at this point, and although Romeo's ego eventually did awaken in his new body, it may have taken some time. I'm not convinced that Geppetto would have let him run around in his puppet body freely either, given what we know that he would have needed him to do for the puppet frenzy. It seems likely that both Gemini and Romeo were at Krat Zoo just before all the chaos we walk into in Overture. But who was the puppet Markiona expected? I think it's Gemini. I think Gemini can have a puppet body by jumping, as I said before. I think the legendary stalker sent him to investigate Krat Zoo, and the alchemist got wind that he was coming. But then he never came back, so the legendary stalker went there to look for him, resulting in the alchemist and archpuppet corpses neatly decorated with roses. Her search ends up leading her to the wax statue where she finds the jacket and gets visibly upset in the story trailer. Afterwards, presumably going back to the cabin where Geppetto's puppet later meets her in. The interesting thing is she's wearing a darkened monad lamp in that scene. This may be because Gemini is out of the lamp and in a puppet body. Something goes wrong with Gemini at the zoo. Maybe Geppetto, maybe something else. And I believe that led to the fight with who I think is Gemini that we see the legendary stalker in during the story trailer. I also don't think that she sent Gemini there alone. I believe Romeo is still human at this point and is gravely injured during a fight at the zoo. He gets out alive, but is still infected with a petrification disease, leading to his choice to be put in a puppet body. I have previously theorized that this jacket belongs to Romeo, and I still think that. My theory is the legendary stalker sent both Romeo and Gemini to investigate the zoo, and that's why she's so upset when she finds the jacket. She feels responsible for sending him there. Hopefully, we'll be getting answers very soon, but what do you think? Who do you think is the puppet that Markiona is waiting for?